You don't really get that with Donald Trump. What you get is him just saying the same thing behind the scenes that he says in public. He does seem to just be able to partition off, to create his own reality and to stay in that. And I think that's been key to him being, that lack of shame, if you will, has been key to him to being able to live for another day, to never say, I made a mistake, this all fell apart because of some things we did, but we're going to do better now. He's never had that. It's just, it was other people's fault. They were all out to get me.
And welcome to the PoliticsGirl podcast. I'm your host, Lee McGowan. Let's get into it. As you may or may not know, my book, A Return to Common Sense, came out on September 17th, 2024. And during my time touring with the book, I was in a Barnes & Noble on the Upper West Side of New York when I ran into another first-time author whose book had come out the same day. Her name was Suzanne Craig, and she was the co-author of Lucky Loser: How Donald Trump Squandered His Father's Fortune and Created the Illusion of Success. We literally ran into each other at the shelf where we both had books and bonded over how cool it was to have worked so hard on something and then just to see it right there at Barnes & Noble. The next week, the two of us both made it to the New York Times bestseller list, something I didn't realize until recently is an incredibly difficult thing to do. In fact, according to an EPJ data science study that analyzed every New York Times bestselling book for 8 years, of the 100,000 or so hardcover books published each year, fewer than 500 make it onto the bestseller list. So it's so fun that Sue and I both made it at the same time, which is why, as I'm back in New York today, doing the pod from the road, I am deeply pleased to be joined by my new friend Suzanne Craig and her co-author Russ Buettner to discuss their absolute runaway hit Lucky Loser, the book the Times critic called a first-rate financial thriller and one of those rare Trump books that deserves, even demands, to be read. Russ and Suzanne are both investigative journalists at the New York Times. Since 2016, their reporting has focused on the personal finances of Donald Trump, including in-depth articles that revealed the fortune Trump inherited from his father and the record of business failures that were hidden in the 20 years of Trump's tax returns. The articles they wrote on these subjects were awarded a Pulitzer Prize and 2 George Polk Awards. Russ joined the Times as an investigative reporter in 2006 and was a finalist for the Pulitzer in 2012. He previously worked on investigative teams at the New York Daily News and the New York Newsday. Sue joined the Times in 2010 and has covered Wall Street and served as the Albany bureau chief for the paper. Prior to joining the Times, Sue was a reporter at the Wall Street Journal and Canada's national newspaper, the Globe and Mail. So without further ado, please welcome my guests, Pulitzer Prize winning writers and best-selling authors of Lucky Loser, Suzanne Craig and Russ Buettner. Welcome, you guys.
Hi there.
Thanks for having us.
Well, thank you for joining me. I mean, Sue, as I was saying in the introduction, it was such a pleasure to meet you in New York. Congratulations to both of you on your extraordinary success of Lucky Loser. People are just loving it.
Yeah, the feedback's been really great. So this is excited to be able to talk to you a little bit more about it. It was, I have to say, just such a hoot to run into you at the Barnes & Noble on the Upper West Side. Just both of us scoping out our new book. So
I know. Well, first-time writers, you got to go look for your book on the shelf. It's important.
Exactly.
Okay, so please tell the audience how this book came to be, because I would assume it was an extension of the Pulitzer Prize winning work on Trump's tax return. So how did you guys decide to make it into this book?
Through these 3 larger articles we had done, one of which explored the money Donald Trump had gotten from his father and how wealthy his father was and how his whole origin story was sort of a fiction. And then 2 more that explored his performance in business over the decades that were based on tax returns that we obtained, like almost 40 years worth of his tax returns. We really felt like we had the outline, sort of a skeleton, as we called it, of a book to explore what had really happened in his life with money, which is the basis for his whole story about himself, right? But with some more reporting, it felt like we could really show him becoming the person that we all saw walk into the White House later on, and kind of get people in the room with cinematic details where you see Donald Trump becoming Donald Trump. You see his father, Fred Trump, and how he comported himself. And then the kind of the arc of the whole family and a succession struggle. It all felt like a really much bigger story than just even those newspaper articles, which we're very proud of, could possibly tell.
Yeah, no, I mean, you should be incredibly proud of them. Obviously, the anonymous tax returns were sent to you at the time, Sue. Is that correct?
Yeah, that happened back in 2016, the 1995 ones. And that showed he had just massive losses that year, which, sort of got us going. But that year was obviously just his candidacy that year was huge. And for us, we were digging into his finances, and he had promised that he was going to release his tax returns several times and then didn't, saying, oh, I'm under audit now, so I can't, even though obviously we know he could have if he wanted to. But everybody in the country seemed to be looking for any sort of information on his finances that would shed light on them. And they're important because, sort of people are like, well, why have you guys spent 10 years on this topic? But it's important to understand the finances of somebody running for president and somebody in public office, because then the potential pressures that could be on them. So that's why it was sort of a big sort of search that year for his tax returns. And then one day in September 2016, I went to my mailbox and found those first pages where we got a glimpse into his finances. And those were just from his 1995 tax returns.
Right. So it's actually pretty interesting because you got those tax returns. Russ had already written about Trump's background in casinos in Atlantic City. So you're both kind of following the trail of Trump's personal finances. And for people that don't know, the basic gist of Trump's financial story, and you guys please correct me if I'm wrong, is that despite all the claims that Trump makes that he's this self-made billionaire, he's actually mostly smoke and mirrors. And I think a lot of us that have been paying attention know that now, that he received more than $400 million from his father, Fred Trump, most of which he avoided paying any gift or inheritance tax on. He put very little money into his enterprises while collecting millions of dollars in salaries and bonuses and payments. He obviously hires all of his children. And then when Sue got access to those 1995 state tax returns that we're talking about, you guys found out that he had also declared $916 million loss, which allowed him to kind of avoid paying taxes again for the next 18 years. And it's this work that you guys were doing, one of the longest investigative articles that's ever been published in the Times, debunking Trump's claims of this self-made wealth, that began to kind of reveal the business empire that he had, his story that he had, and how it was just sort of riddled with tax dodging. And then you guys decided to kind of put a book together because of that. Is that correct?
I like that summary very much. Yes, that was very good.
Yeah.
I think we also started to see that there was this split between businesses that he ran and then how he really got his money, right? He got a ton of money from The Apprentice, which we can talk a lot about, a ton of money from his dad. He was pushed into this investment against his will that generated a lot of money. But then every time he tries to create something to make it look like he's a really effectual business person, secretly behind the scenes, it's not doing very well. So it creates this illusion that he's really successful and doing all these things, while it seems to us in the final resolve, like the things that have the best chance to succeed are the things that he has the least sort of decision-making authority over on.
Yeah. I think people have said over the years, if he did nothing with the money he was given, if he had just put it in the S&P or just collected the rents, he could have had way more money than he did when he ran for president. I mean, as you point out, one of the major fictions around Donald Trump, this story he tells everyone for decades, is that he took this small loan from his father and he turned it into this $1 million business and real estate empire, that he was this genius who never had it easy. And he was kind of this pull yourself up by your bootstraps American dream guy. And it's this idealized version of him that ultimately made him the face of The Apprentice, but also he's sold as making him singularly qualified to lead the nation when he ran for president. Except, as you both point out in your book, none of that is true.
Right. We found no evidence of that loan to start with. I mean, it's a great story. It's a great American story. And you see why he immediately in his life kind of gravitated towards this hard scrabble. I started all this on my own and I had no help except for this. I wouldn't say $1 million is small, but this small loan that he's gone on about. But what we found is that his dad was there at every turn for most of his life. It wasn't just his dad was there when he was 21 and he needed, a loan to get into college. His dad was there since basically the kids were born. He set up a trust for them, and it just goes through his entire life. He had support when he was a kid. They were also very wealthy. We talked to people for the book, and just to paint a picture for people of the wealth that he grew up in, the kids in the neighborhood always remembered the Trump house. I always loved the house that kids remember in the neighborhood. And for these guys, it was Trump's house because they had an electric garage opener, which was a big thing back then. And he had a color TV when nobody else did. The family did. And kids would go over to the house to play, and there was a maid there who would bring them food, either hamburgers or little sandwiches with the edges cut off. And then he went to great schools, paid for by his father. But then it started really in business, where he got financial support from his dad for, projects that he needed. He got help with loans from Fred's lenders. I don't know if it's more important, less important, but he got access to Fred's contacts. The mayor of New York was probably one of Fred's best friends and helped secure projects in New York for Donald early on. And then he got other contacts, and he had access to money to be able to hire great consultants. And then you just see throughout his life at different turns, Fred was there with his checkbook. There's one story that, some people may have heard about how an assistant for Fred walked into a casino once when Donald was having a lot of trouble at one of his casinos and bought $3.5 million worth of chips with no intention to gamble. It was to help him with the monthly interest payment on a loan that month. And then right up into the White House, he's still getting money from an investment that Fred made back in the 70s. There's no hard Scrabble story here, only in his mind.
No, and I think he continues to do that to this day. I mean, you see what's going on with the Trump Truth Social. It was just tanking, and all of a sudden it's going up out of nowhere. And you just know that somebody is in there buying it to prop the stock up to make him look more like a success than he has ever been. I mean, it's quite amazing. I think it's quite tremendous that you called the book Lucky Loser, because clearly the man is incredibly lucky. And you're talking about the Trump house growing up. I mean, I can remember the first kid in our neighborhood that had an answering machine, and we thought like, wow, how cool is that? Right. I mean, despite the fact that this is an incredibly well-researched book, and I really should tell people this book is incredible. Sue and Russ have done some intense and amazing work here. They have interviews, they've done research, they've checked stories against tax information that goes back, business records going back 30, 40 years. I mean, this is incredible work, but it's also full of facts about the family that isn't just financial, right? It's not just a financial book. It's like this page turner that includes real information on the Trump family from the 60s, from the 70s, a lot of information regarding the relationships between Fred Trump and his son, Donald and his brothers, their relationship with each other. And I think that you guys felt like that would really need to be included in the narrative because it painted a full picture. Is that what you guys thought?
Again, I couldn't have said it better myself. I think really we had sort of a hesitancy to try to start the book when we did in like 1923 when Fred graduated from high school. That seemed like a lot of ground to cover. And there was this key moment in 1985 where Donald really changed. He just became convinced he could do anything, and he started acting on that, and his whole really career unraveled at that point. But when you look at it, like you're saying, there's just too much there. Every new episode you go back to, that's Donald Trump becoming who he is. That's a part of his personality emerging. That's how he views loyalty. You see that with his father. His father never questions any of the things that he does, even though they're in complete opposition to how Fred acted both in business and in his personal life. And Donald came to expect that from everyone, how he's building this bubble around himself that's financed by his dad, where he's never challenged. And then the media's role in creating him this myth that he's a billionaire when really he doesn't even on paper have anything that he can claim as his own at that point in time. And it just accelerates through the decades. And there was just not another way to look at it than this was a gigantic like snowball of a story that had to be taken from the beginning to really make sense by the time you got to the end.
Yeah. And how sort of Trump became the chosen son, the one that Fred was really looking out for, is sort of an interesting concept too. How closely do you track your bank statements and credit card transactions? I can tell you that I don't look nearly enough. How many transactions do you think you make a month? You might be surprised to learn that the average US consumer makes about 70 payments a month, which is why keeping track of our spending can be so overwhelming and where Rocket Money comes in. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps empower you to save more, spend less, and take control of your financial life. Rocket Money makes it quick and easy to stay on top of your finances. With Rocket Money, you can see all of your checking, savings, credit cards, and investments in one place, allowing you to understand your spending trends. Rocket Money can also help you set up a custom budget to identify top spending categories and suggest areas where you could personally adjust your spending habits, and they'll even calculate your monthly spending to alert you to when you're going over budget. Rocket Money also has a goals feature that automatically saves money for you, so you don't even have to think about it. Whether that goal is to pay off a credit card debt or save money for a vacation or simply have a little cushion in your bank account, Rocket Money makes it easy, which is probably why they have over 5 million happy members after saving their users over $1 billion across the app's features. So let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Get Rocket Money today at rocketmoney.com/politicsgirl. That's rocketmoney.com/politicsgirl. ROCKET money.com/politicsgirl. I was so excited when Calm approached us to sponsor the show because I love Calm and I have literally been using it for years. Calm is the #1 brand for sleep, meditation, and relaxation, giving you the power to calm your mind and change your life. I've had a lot of trouble sleeping over the years and found Calm because I had heard about their sleep stories. But I've now got a curated list of sleep stories and meditations and soundscapes that I listen to almost every day. At this point, I turn on one of my favorite sleep stories like the Glacier Express, Arctic Cruise, the Taurus Express, and I am out in minutes. Calm has literally trained my brain to just go to sleep. There are a number of sleep stories I don't even know how they end after years of using them. My husband Sean uses Calm as well, but he prefers the soundscapes like green noise, brown noise, wind in the pines. Calm even has grounding exercises if you're feeling overwhelmed, meditations for different emotions, short guided sessions, breath work, and expert-led talks to help you handle grief or improve your self-esteem or work on your relationships. It's just all right there on your phone. So stress less, sleep more, and live better with Calm. For listeners of our show, Calm is offering an exclusive offer of 40% off a Calm premium subscription at calm.com/politicsgirl. That's CALM.com/politicsgirl for 40% off unlimited access to Calm's entire library. That's calm.com/politicsgirl. I really do use this app every day. It's a true game changer. Trump became the chosen son, the one that Fred was really looking out for, is sort of an interesting concept too.
Right. That was one of the great parts just early in the book that we really got into just because it became so tragic. And, we know Fred a little bit, partly through Mary Trump, who we dealt with for that 2018 story, because she had given us a lot of documents because she was involved in litigation.
And for those who don't know, Mary Trump is Donald Trump's niece and the daughter of Donald Trump's brother.
Right. And so Fred Trump, Fred Trump Jr., who was the eldest son and was going to be the heir apparent, was her father. And we talked to her a lot back in the day about her dad, but then to really get into the reporting of him and talk to his friends, both in high school and university and beyond that knew him, and just to sort of see the unraveling of him in the book and just how sad it was. He had dreams. I think he was interested in the beginning in going into the company and admired his father. But as he got older, he developed other interests and he wanted to fly. He became a pilot, and his dad did become a pilot, and his dad just wanted him in the business. He didn't want him to have any other interests. And Fred eventually, his dad cast him aside and decided Donald was going to be the chosen one. And Fred in the book just sort of unravels. He drinks a lot. We talked to friends who say he would start the morning with a vodka and orange juice. And he basically drank himself to death. He tried to quit. He couldn't. And he's still, though, even though he's going through all this, and he tried to pull away, he couldn't. So he ends back up working for his dad in a really menial job, living in one of his, dad's apartment buildings, kind of just a really sad scene. You can imagine him in this 1-bedroom apartment, and he ends up getting divorced from his wife and then ends up dying at age 42. And then Donald obviously ascends through this and, has a pretty, I think, troubled relationship with his brother. But Fred Jr., it was just a really sad thing. And everybody raved about him who knew him. How fun he was and just great to be around. So many people in the book talked about just his great disposition. Hail, fellow well met was what one of them said. And I think that really sums him up for me when I think about him.
Yeah, but I also think what a legacy this family has. You have a number of children. You want your children to do exactly what you want them to do. If they stray from that line, you abandon them. And I think that's what happened to Fred Trump Jr. And I think that is how Donald Trump also sees his own children. That there's the stories of how he treated his own children when they were young and how they've all kind of come back to the fold and they all jockey for position to be the favorite because that's how he was taught to treat children from his own parent. And that's how his children behave because they all don't want to fall out of favor. I mean, obviously the book itself is a step-by-step accounting retelling of the former president's business empire that reveals he's basically just a shameless hustler. He would lose money, then have it again, then lose money, then have it again. But he was very, very good at giving the illusion of winning. Like in many ways, I feel like, as The Guardian said, you guys have both uncovered probably as much as we could ever know behind the truth of the narrative, to Trump's wealth, to the mythology of himself as this genius businessman, and how many people bought that story he was selling. But I feel like the book also shows Trump's tolerance for risk, which is actually quite impressive because he's clearly not that smart. I mean, that's what I'm getting from it. It's just that we now know that if Donald Trump just did nothing, like I was saying, right? Like, he could have just collected rent checks and womanized and kind of like cruised around as a scion. He would have, I think that they say $800 billion by the time he ran for president. And while Forbes have said he probably has about $2.5 billion when he ran for president, considering his difficulties with his accounting and his legal troubles, I mean, the statistics say that could be anywhere between $5 billion and $0 or less than $0 that he's actually worth. So Trump is always talking about how rich he is. He's always putting on this show, proving to everyone that he really is the guy from The Art of the Deal and The Apprentice. And yet in reality, especially when you do what you guys did and really look into it, he's always been on the edge, just always, a hair away from financial disaster. And that kind of stress usually would ruin people. And yet Trump still continues to thrive.
You're really getting into like the heart of his psyche there.
Yeah, which I think you guys did with the book.
I mean, I think you're right. He has an incredible tolerance for risk. I think he has an ability to sort of partition that off to almost to the point where he doesn't, if it's an inconvenient truth about him, he doesn't believe it. Throughout that period you're talking about, from the mid 1980s, he's taking on huge amounts of debt. He's taking huge gambles, buying things that he doesn't even have a plan for, while his father's told him in all his life, don't do that because you're paying for it from the moment you buy it. So like, don't buy it till you have a plan. And he broke that rule right off. And so all this mounting, but he seems to convince himself that it's going to be okay because it's him. I also think it's really hard to untangle that from his need for attention. All of that stuff then, to us, I think, seems like it's just driven by a need for a constant attention, to constantly be in the public eye, because he's doing these things that just involve incredible risk that could bring him to his knees, even put his inherited fortune at risk. But he's also announcing things every other week that never happen, right? So that's part of it too. 60 Minutes in 1985 decides to do a profile of him because they have this sense that he's just everywhere. He's only at that point in time, like, rehabilitated a hotel with a partner, put up Trump Tower with a partner, and built a casino with a partner, all more experienced partners. That's not nothing, but that's what he's done. But they have this sense that he's everywhere. And they just say there's a new billionaire in town and his name is Donald Trump, which was not true at that point in time. But that was the image that he created. So I don't know how you untangle for sure his capacity from risk with his craven need for constant attention and to look wealthy and to look like he's the most successful, important person in the entire country.
Yeah. And I feel like a lot of people helped him out with that. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like a lot of people just kind of kept buying into that idea, this idea that he was this high roller, this genius, this ladies' man. And it kind of led him to make all of these incredibly risky decisions to keep up that facade. And it's hard not to see that mentality as why he wanted to run for the presidency. Like, why not me? I may as well do it. Right. I would be successful. And I think also why he's dead set on getting it back now. It's like his whole life was about saving himself from himself. And he kept making more choices to kind of back up his bad choices. But he's been so successful at it that he thinks, why would that end now? I think that's why he seems so like, he doesn't understand that he's, up on felony charges or, things could happen because it's never caught up with him. So why would it now?
Yeah, I think well said. And I think it's not just the media ecosphere. When I think about it, it's, the banks were culpable, everybody from the banks to the media to this TV producer called Mark Burnett, who created The Apprentice. And all of that, I think you're right. It led right up to the White House. The Apprentice is just, it takes up a fair bit of the book because it's financially very important to Donald Trump. It's sort of that big second stroke of luck that we talk about in the book. The first one, of course, being his father and that huge inheritance he got. And then he runs into Mark Burnett. And, you know, lucky him, Mark Burnett had pioneered reality television and was coming off this red hot show, Survivor, that a lot of people may have watched or they've heard of. And he was looking for something else. And he decided he wanted to move back to the States. So he was going to do like a Survivor in the city. And he wanted to make it a kind of like a business show. So he needed a mogul, somebody that would be worth working for, that would be this big prize. And he looked at some other people that were actually real moguls, Warren Buffett and Jack Welch. And it's incredible
a real
because
mogul. I think it's so hilarious because a real mogul wouldn't do it. You know what I mean? I often think about, you know, the housewives shows and, you know, the business shows, and often the people that would really be in that world, they would never do a show. It's a funny combination of need for validation and also having the illusion of whatever it is they're selling.
Oh, it's funny you mention that because there's another show that he got on called Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. It was Robin Leach. He was the guy who was the host. And even on that show, they said Donald Trump at that point was losing money. They didn't know that, but he had all the toys that TV would love. He had helicopters and boats, and he had the, Mar-a-Lago down in Florida. And so they kept putting him on because he was visually great. And other people, we talked to one of the producers of the show and they said, well, we had a lot of rich people who just didn't want to be on the show, but you'd call him up if they needed him and he'd be right there, and he'd put him in a helicopter and take him out to his casinos, which are great for TV. They weren't, making money, but that didn't matter to the show. And it didn't matter to Mark Burnett. He needed somebody that was good on TV, and he came and he found Donald Trump, and they struck quite a deal in 2003 when Mark approached him. There's a funny story in the book that even that approach should have set off some alarm bells for Mark Burnett. He comes to pitch Donald Trump on being the mogul for The Apprentice. And he arrives in New York City and he plans to meet him in a couple weeks. He wants to get his pitch all together, but he phones Donald Trump from the airport. He's coming into the city thinking, I'm going to need a week or two to get on this mogul's calendar. And he phones and he gets put right through to Trump. And Donald Trump's like, hey, Survivor guy. And Mark's like, well, I'd love to come over and see you. And I've got this kind of idea. And Donald Trump, because he's not busy, was like, well, come over right now. And Mark kind of freaked out because he was going to have no time to prepare his pitch. So he ends up showing up right away. This doesn't set off any alarm bells in Mark's head that maybe this guy isn't, this rich guy. But also for Mark Burnett's purposes, he just needed somebody who was good on TV, who had all of the accoutrements of wealth and the image that Donald Trump did. He was good on TV. And so they struck this deal that ends up being very lucrative for Trump ultimately, where he gets half of the product placement that's on the show. And what that is, just in really simple terms, if you watch a show, when you see a product like a Coke can, Coke's paying for that to be there. And so Donald Trump got a deal where he would get half of that money. It turns out to be a monster deal for Donald Trump because the show, The Apprentice, for those who've watched it, it's basically a commercial where a company goes on and they're there for 45 minutes and people are competing maybe to do an ad campaign for them. So a lot of money is coming in per episode. We saw financials where it was up to $4 or $5 million, and Donald Trump just got half of that. So, and then he got all the licensing deals from that. It's just crazy.
Yeah, no, it's a symbiotic relationship between Burnett and Trump. They both needed something and they both got something out of it. I mean, like Donald Trump is not remotely a self-made man, but he certainly is lucky, right? I mean, he probably has no business running a company, which is why he was available at, 15 minutes notice. So he definitely he really has no business running our country either, which is what kind of astounds me. Like your book points out that Trump's business career runs in a similar way to how his presidency ran, right? He surrounds himself with people who will tell him what he wants to hear. He's susceptible to flattery. He doesn't really like to work. He doesn't really like to be questioned. He fires people he doesn't like. But the book kind of also explores this really American story, right? Of how someone using entertainment and media and culture is able to create a persona that doesn't really exist and get enough people to believe in that myth that you can ride that myth all the way to, in our case, the top office in the land, right? The problem is, I think, that this mythology has now taken over 1/3 of our country. And no matter what this man does now or how he behaves or what he puts out there, people still believe and trust in him, which feels like, how is that possible? Because it was always smoke and mirrors to begin with. The older I get, the more intentional I try to be about the way that I live and eat and take care of my body, which is why I'm such a big Mosh fan. You might have heard of Mosh on Shark Tank. Mosh is a company founded by Maria Shriver and her son Patrick Schwarzenegger with a simple mission: to create a conversation about brain health through food, education, and research. Mosh joined forces with the world's top scientists and functional nutritionists to make something beyond your average protein bar. With 10 delicious flavors, including 3 that are plant-based, each Mosh bar is made with ingredients that support brain health like lion's mane, collagen, and omega-3s. Mosh bars also now feature the first and only brand boosted with cognizin, a premium neurotropic that supplies the brain with a patented form of acetylcholine. So when normal people speak, brain boosters. I don't eat enough, which makes me droopy halfway through the day, but I keep Mosh bars in my desk, in my car, in my purse, so I can keep my brain and body functioning better than just snacking on whatever's in arm's reach. And here's the best part. Mosh donates a portion of all proceeds from your order to fund gender-based brain health research through the Women's Alzheimer's Movement. 2/3 of all Alzheimer's patients are women, and Mosh is working closely to close that gap between men and women's health research. I'm always going on about their lemon and white chocolate flavor because it's my favorite, but you really can't go wrong with any of them. So if you want to find ways to give back to others and fuel your body and brain, Mosh bars are the perfect choice for you. Head to moshlife.com/politicsgirl to save 20% off, plus free shipping on either their Bestsellers trial pack or their new plant-based trial pack. That's 20% off plus free shipping on either the Bestsellers or plant-based trial pack at moshlife.com/politicsgirl. Finally, I haven't talked about the PoliticsGirl Premium subscriber package in a while, and today felt like a good time because over the summer, I was able to meet with my wonderful subscribers in DC and New York and Los Angeles. I am only out of my living room and in the studio and on the road because of people who appreciated what I do and wanted to help. I was only able to do my book, A Return to Common Sense, thanks to the patronage of the PoliticsGirl family. And I'm only allowed to bring facts to the people on CNN roundtables because the PoliticsGirl Premium members allowed me to remain independent. I know our members won't hear these acknowledgements because they get this podcast ad-free, but I still wanted to publicly thank them for their support and let those of you who aren't subscribers know how very much it means to me to have people believe in what I'm trying to do here. I don't really like to ask for help. I find it deeply uncomfortable. I started this project from a place of altruism, but it's really taken on a life of its own, and independent work like mine is only possible with individual support from people like you. So if you would ever consider supporting me in doing this quality of work and would like to receive the pods and rants delivered to your inbox ad-free, please check out and potentially subscribe to PoliticsGirl Premium. Click on the link in the bio, or you can click the link at the top of the page at politicsgirl.com. Thank you so much. The help goes a long way, and I am sincerely grateful for your support of the show, no matter what you choose to do. Now, back to Sue and Russ. No matter what this man does now, or how he behaves, or what he puts out there, people still believe and trust in him, which feels like, how is that possible? Because it was always smoke and mirrors to begin with.
But I think a lot of the people you're talking about don't realize that it was smoke and mirrors to begin with. I think that's the big nub of it. And I've always had this phrase locked in my mind about him that he didn't come to America, right? America came to him. He's the same guy today, even really just more calcified. His worst traits have become more calcified over the decades. His unwillingness to grow, to learn from his mistakes, to admit mistakes, his complete rejection of expertise, believing that his intuition is always the best choice, which is generally just the way he wants things to be. There are people who are in business with him in the mid-'80s saying he's just saying the way he wants things to be and calling that intuition and judgment. He didn't really alter all of that. America just began to tolerate his particular rough brand of charisma, the way he would deal with complicated things just by insulting someone's appearance or saying they're stupid, right? That's the way he argues. It's not by saying, well, no, you're not quite right here because this happened in history and this other factor that I know about in business, it changes that. He just says, you're like he did yesterday. You're dumb. You're retarded. I think he said one day recently.
Yeah.
Just
and are you talking
things,
about,
right?
he's called Kamala, just terrible name, stupid, retarded. But he also, had that huge meeting recently with the Chicago business leaders. And he was telling the head of Bloomberg, the editor of Bloomberg, that he didn't know anything about business.
You've been wrong your whole life, he said.
You've been wrong your whole life is what he said. And I thought, oh my God. And, and you can hear chuckles from the audience that are kind of like, is this really happening? You know, I think it's quite astounding when you see him in a room with real business people. You know, there are obviously sycophants in the room that are still there laughing when they're supposed to laugh. But when you hear the murmurings of people that really know business and really understand it, it's quite striking. And I think he feels very uncomfortable in that kind of environment.
Yeah. And I think just to close the loop on what you were saying before, I think part of what's different now and what enables this image of him to sustain itself is that there's this protective information bubble that you can live in, right? There's Fox News, which looks pretty much the same as Walter Cronkite looked 70 years ago, but it's much different, right? But people can live in that, and you don't get that idea that he's not what he seems. That's not challenged at all. Whatever he says is taken as an earnest fact and then expanded upon and broadcast from there. If you can live in that, you're not going to shake those people free. They don't have to like see anything else. And that wasn't the case in the 70s, the 80s, or the 90s even.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, Russ. I think a lot of people see Donald Trump's ability to constantly save himself, how he somehow managed to always skirt responsibility or pawn it off on someone else or keep his hands clean when they definitely were not, as evidence of his ingenuity or his skill or his abilities. I personally don't see it that way. I just think he is, in my opinion, I would say he's amoral, right? He's shameless and cunning in a way that most of us don't understand. He's not a genius. He literally just doesn't care if he breaks the law. He doesn't care what certain people think of him. His brain is wired to consider what's best for himself and then how those choices will serve him. As you were saying, like America has accepted this brand of charisma that is really just bullying. And I feel like the book tells us, you know, that where Trump was by 2017 was basically a complete illusion. It was this combination of bravado and branding that always allowed him to walk away with something, but mostly at the expense of others.
You hit it. I mean, I think that you see, and the guy that you meet at the White House is the guy that, yeah, he's been there his whole life. I think people just come to see the person that's in their bubble if they're watching Fox News and they're just willing to withstand it. But he's been that guy his entire life.
Yeah. And I think what you're saying is a lot of people just don't see. They see the guy from The Apprentice, not a boy who was born rich, chosen above his siblings to be the beneficiary of an astonishing family fortune. He was in the right place at the right time to capitalize on Manhattan real estate at these critical moments that could have just wrecked him. Or sent him into total bankruptcy. Things always broke his way. Time and time again, he was able to use it. And then he got this celebrity boost from Mark Burnett, right? To turn him into this real estate mogul, to attract new partners when his old ones got wise to him. He ended up finding banks that would lend him money when no one else would. And it seems that he just has tons of people who surrounded themselves with him, kind of barnacle people who would just play along with all his ridiculousness and help build up that mythology and not take him to court when he, you know, betrayed them.
Right. And his charisma, you can't underestimate it. And I think that does come into it. But that combined with the power, and he knows the power of a lie repeated over and over and over will get passed down into history as truth. Some of us see through it. And through the years, there were journalists who saw through it. But the power, he was able to power through that simply because he knows that that's the case. And I've heard his press secretaries give interviews recently where he would actually tell them, like, just repeat it. I know it's a lie, but repeat it because people will believe it if you say it often enough. And he used that along with the innate charisma that he does have that people talk about that we interviewed for the book. And he was able to use a combination of all of that and his money to get where he is. And Mark Burnett is a really fascinating character in the book and just what happened there, because everybody who arrived on the set of The Apprentice, they knew it was a joke, but they didn't care. Their job, as they said, was to make this guy look like the best prize in the world. What Mark Burnett did in terms of just rehabilitating his image in the front of the American people, I don't think it can ever be undone. I mean, it still exists to so many people as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's entirely true. I think that they all kind of Wizard of Oz'd him. You know what I mean? It wasn't just one man behind the curtain. It was the great and powerful Oz on the screen, but there were so many people behind the curtain twirling those reels and making sure he looked exactly like he was supposed to look. I always think about George Costanza from Seinfeld when I think about Trump, that it's not a lie if you believe it. You know what I mean? And he used to say that on Seinfeld all the time. And I think of that when I think of Trump, because I'm like, I at this point, I'm not even sure if he's saying, Goebbels style, that if I repeat this enough times, people will believe it. I honestly think he just convinces himself that his reality is his reality and he will it to be so. I think most of us hope that the Trump story will end up with some sort of real comeuppance, right? That we can't fathom how someone that corrupt, without any semblance of a moral compass, could end up on top again, let alone, surrounded by just hideously unscrupulous people who are now surrounding him now. There's sort of no stopgap anymore with him running for president this time. But I think that there's enough of us that are kind of hoping that the larger they are, the larger, the harder they fall might finally apply. What are your thoughts on that? Do you guys think that Trump's luck is ever going to run out? Is the guy ever going to roll snake eyes?
That is a great question. It requires a better crystal ball than I think either of us have. But and it is, you want to think of this country as a meritocracy, right? That's a really kind of foundational concept of both our way of government and also just the fundamental idea of capitalism, right? That those who really do well succeed, and those who don't rise to their highest level of capacity and not beyond. But it's just not what happens. Like you're where you're born in the world makes a tremendous amount of difference. And if a television producer happens to discover you and create a new version of you that's very effective on a top rated show and make you rich again, that's going to have a tremendous effect on your life. I really think one of the things you said made me think of something that you were talking about whether he believes his own stuff. I think one of the unique things for us about reporting on him, usually when we're reporting on people who are taking one position in public that's not true, when you get deep enough to people that they've been around, they've acknowledged that. They've said, look, I know that this isn't the way things actually worked, but we've got to pitch this in order to make this whole thing fly, to have a chance to come out on another day. You don't really get that with Donald Trump. What you get is him just saying the same thing behind the scenes that he says in public. He does seem to just be able to partition off, to create his own reality and to stay in that. And I think that's been key to him being, that lack of shame, if you will, has been key to him to being able to live for another day, to never say, I made a mistake, this all fell apart because of some things we did, but we're going to do better now. He's never had that. It's just, it was other people's fault. They were all out to get me. One of the threads to this book is since he was 25 years old, he believes everybody's been out to get him, and he's still living on that today, right? So it's you want to believe that if somebody deserves a reckoning, it's going to come, but it's just not always the case. And whether he may still be lucky, he's trying to find ways to monetize all this now, this persecution complex, and selling pictures of himself with blood across his cheek. Even the day after he was shot, he gets an ear graze. He's marketing things to try to profit from that.
He sold his mugshot.
Never surrender when he's surrendering.
Yeah, look, it's pretty, we can't deny that Donald Trump has been highly successful at rebranding himself, highly successful at staying on top of the heap when other people fell down. Even if his brand of success is amoral, I would say, and not something any of us should aspire to, but it is definitely something that I really hope we don't continue to reward. I really feel like this is one of those situations. If we want the American dream to continue, we have to say, this man made his bed and he has to lie in it, but your book in many ways is speaking truth to power, right? I'm sure you understood writing it, that there was no way this book, much like your work on Trump's tax returns, wasn't in some way putting a target on both of your backs. But you did it because it was the right thing to do, because it was the truth, and because truth and evidence actually still exist in this post-truth world we're sort of living in right now. And I really do hope that everyone has the chance to read Lucky Loser before this election. But even if they don't, I really think they should get it and read it after, because I think it really tells a story of how far we've gone in the American dream to allow illusion to usurp reality and how detrimental that can be to our society. So will you guys tell people how the audience can buy your runaway hit, obviously, but also how they can continue to follow both of your work?
Oh, thanks, Lena. I just want to thank you. First of all, you distilled some of the larger points in such an elegant way, about America and, how we look at people who are successful. It was just wonderful. So I appreciate that. You can find the book. I'm finding it at bookstores when I'm wandering around town. So it's there. And you can also get it at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and local bookstores. We're back at work. We took 2 years off to write the book, and we're back and following the former president and have a close eye on the election. So we're there.
Right. Well, wonderful. I mean, Russ, do you have any Twitters we need to be following? Any socials we should be following? Any work you want us to know about?
The Times sets up a nice page for each of us that has all the articles we do in the order they appear. I work really hard to post on Twitter at least once a quarter. I rarely meet that goal, but I'm still there. And I think the number of followers I have shows my underperformance on Twitter.
That's all right. The place has become a cesspool. And I'm so glad you guys are still at Twitter. I mean, you're still at the Times, because sometimes I wonder about the poor old gray lady too. And I love that you two are out there doing wonderful work still for that publication, because I think that we really do need proper journalism in today's world. And I think people have forgotten how important it is that there really are truths, and there really are facts, and there really are evidence. It isn't just, we can't all live in Donald Trump reality land where it is what we want it to be, you know? So I'm really glad you guys are out there doing the work. I mean, I want to thank you both for coming and talking to me today on the pod, but clearly Trump has been this sort of self-centered, unreliable business partner and man and pathological liar his whole life. And you guys have studied him for years. The American public has been able to study him for about a decade now. And honestly, I am really looking forward to wrapping these years up. So thank you for giving us such a true accounting of Trump and his money and his life, what he had, what he, lost, what he has left. You guys really did us a major service.
Thank you.
That's so kind of you. Thanks very much. You were really great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This was great.
So that was Suzanne Craig and Russ Buettner, the authors of the incredible book, Lucky Loser: How Donald Trump Squandered His Father's Fortune and Created the Illusion of Success. Deeply researched financial reporting can be incredibly boring, but these two brilliant journalists have put together a narrative that just pulls you into the story. They paint a picture of a life backed up with a century of evidence that proves Donald Trump to be what most of us knew him to be, which is a very lucky man, but dare I say it, an absolute con artist. What we need to consider is if we want to keep rewarding the illusion. As Russ said, Donald Trump didn't come to America. America came to him. And we as a nation embraced and accepted the behaviors that took him as far as the White House, and might, if we don't wake up, land him there again. Reality can't just be what Donald Trump wants it to be. We have to return to a place where morals and values once again hold weight. In my opinion, it is well past time for this guy's luck to change. I want to thank Russ and Sue for joining us today, and you for caring enough about democracy to be here. Now go buy Lucky Loser, because truth really is stranger than fiction. Until next week, PG out. The Politics Girl podcast is written and performed by me, Lee McGowan, in partnership with the Midas Media Network, and produced and edited by Happy Warrior Entertainment. All rights reserved.